Welcome back to my shower room. Today I bring you guys here with a lot to talk about. I want to talk about muscle density versus muscle size. Is there a certain way to train for size rather than muscle density? And basically what really is, what's happening when muscles get bigger and what's happening when muscles get more dense. Alright guys, so when you weight train, it's obvious that your muscles get bigger. In some way or another, the size of the muscle grows. That process is called hypertrophy. So the existing muscle cells or the muscle, fibers that your body has, they just grew. And you could notice this subjectively, objectively, by measurements or just by observations. Skeletal muscle hypertrophy can be measured by either an ultrasound, an MRI, or a DEXA. We're talking about hypertrophy. We know that it's any time a pre-existing muscle cell grows. So that would be hypertrophy, muscular hypertrophy. So I have some notes that I took on hypertrophy here. So there's two different ways that a muscle cell can grow. So an individual muscle fiber is made up of two components, a sarcoplasm and a sarcomere. And you guys know this from A&P. Growing the sarcoplasm means increasing the non-contractile proteins and fluids between muscle fibers, making the cross-sectional area of the muscle larger, but decreasing the density of muscle fibers. In other words, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy increases muscle size, but not muscle strength. Growing the sarcomere, however, means increasing in the size and number of sarcomeres in the myofibrils that make up individual muscle fibers. Sarcomere hypertrophy increases the density of myofibrils that contract to make a muscle motion. This hypertrophy is what leads to greater strength. There's a few different ways to induce muscle hypertrophy. One would be the common way, so it would be 10 to 12, 15 reps, heavy, right around 5 sets each exercise. But it's also said to mix in some really low volume and some really high volume stuff as well, just to really maximize the effort to grow. We're all genetically predisposed to have a certain amount of muscle cells within our muscle. So we're predisposed to a certain amount of muscle fibers in each of our muscles. So some people are denser than others just by nature. But so we know that we can make our pre-existing muscle cells grow, but can we increase the number of muscle cells through training? Hyperplasia is a term that refers to an increased number of muscle cells or fibers. Although hyperplasia is assumed to occur through weight training, it's fairly untested, because the only way that hyperplasia can be really tested is if someone was to agree to a biopsy and someone was to be cut open and the individual muscle fibers were counted. So it's really difficult to test for hyperplasia, muscle hyperplasia, because it would involve cutting someone open and counting the individual muscle fibers. I want to know if it's possible to increase the number of muscle cells that I have in my body. So I hit the web naturally and look for some studies. I did some research and I was really trying to uncover whether it was fact or fiction that you can induce muscle hyperplasia through weight training. I didn't find many human studies, but what I did find were some pretty solid animal studies. Alright guys, I'm going to read to you a couple notes that I took on a study on cats regarding muscle hyperplasia. So one researcher did his experiment on cats. He trained 20 cats to lift weights. The 20 cats were divided into groups. One group lifted weights heavier than 1 kilogram, while the other group lifted weights lighter than 1 kilogram. An additional 16 cats were used as a control group. The goal was to compare the differences in the right flexor carpi radialis, so the forearm in the cats. After 34 weeks, the cats who lifted weights heavier than 1 kilogram to get a food reward experienced a 20.5% increase in the number of muscle fibers. The cats that lifted weights lower than 1 kilogram didn't achieve really any increase in muscle fibers. So this study actually lasted for 101 weeks, and at the end of the study, the cats that lifted greater than 1 kilogram had 9% more muscle fibers than the other cats. So this study is on quails. So in one study, researchers attached 10% of the bird's body mass to one wing. The load kept the wing stretched for 30 days. The researchers found an increase, a massive increase in the number of muscle fibers in the stretched wing. In a follow-up study, researchers included a few changes in the protocol. The load that was attached to the wings varied from 10 to 35% of the quail's body weight. Also, they included a few days of total rest with no loading on the wings. The load was on the right wing while the left was used for control. This protocol lasted for 38 days. The quails were examined after 12, 16, 20, 24, and 28 days of loaded stretching. An average increase in 82% was found in the 28 days of stretch group. In some quails, the values reached as high as 90% increase. So these are pretty profound gains in very short periods of time. Like I said, training for muscle hyperplasia is fairly untested in regards to how exactly it works, what is the best way to train for it, and whether or not it actually occurs during some types of training. So there's a lot of question marks here, and like I said, the best way to find out if you've gained additional muscle cells or muscle fibers is to literally count them, and that requires cutting yourself open, something no one wants to do. So but if we look at the animal studies, it's fair to assume that when you up the ante in your training, when you train a little harder, when you have a longevic training routine, you've been training for years and years, it just adds up that you would acquire new cells, muscle cells, during that process, and not, of course those muscles grew. There was hypertrophy that took place, but I'm almost certain that new muscle fibers were added along the way. Hyperplasia. If you guys are interested in hypertrophy or hyperplasia, just check out my video description here. I'll have some pretty detailed notes on each. And like I said, it's fairly untested territory, so a lot of it is do your own research. A lot of it is guess and check with your body, read what's out there, but go do some research, go hit the gym and play around with some things. Personally, I can pretty fairly assess whether someone is dense or not, so whether someone has dense muscle or not. And sometimes you'll see those guys that are really big and really swole, but they can't really move the numbers that maybe a smaller, more dense guy can move. So keep that in mind. Very interesting stuff, the way the body works. There's a whole lot of science that goes behind it. And like I said, if you guys are interested, check out the video description, but further your research. There's a lot to be learned out there. Alright fam, thank you so much for joining me in my shower room. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Until next time, peace. Anytime that a muscle cell grows,